The city streets were alive with the hum of passing cars and the chatter of people walking by. Among them, sitting quietly on a worn-out folding stool, was Daniel, an artist with a dream that had been fading like the old paint on his easel. His hands, once steady with confidence, now trembled slightly as he sketched the faces of strangers for just a few dollars. It wasn't the life he had imagined, but it was the only way he knew how to survive. Daniel had always believed that art could tell stories, that a single brushstroke could hold more meaning than 1,000 words. But these days, his sketches felt empty, as if he were just going through the motions. The world around him kept moving forward, yet he remained stuck in the same place, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would notice his work and change his fate. One chilly afternoon, as the golden sun dipped below the skyline, a woman approached his makeshift stand. She was older, her face kind but weary, as though time had been both her friend and her enemy. She studied the portraits displayed on his stand, her eyes lingering on each one. "Your work is beautiful," she said softly, her voice carrying a gentle warmth. Daniel nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thank you. Would you like me to draw you?" She hesitated for a moment, then sat down on the stool in front of him. "Yes, please. But I'd like you to draw me the way you see me, not just how I look." Daniel wasn't sure what she meant, but he nodded and got to work. As his pencil moved across the paper, he found himself studying her closely. The lines on her face, the softness in her eyes, the way she held her hands together, as if protecting something unseen. There was a story in her expression, a past she wasn't sharing, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt connected to his work again. As he shaded the final details, the woman watched him with quiet curiosity. "You remind me of someone," she murmured, almost to herself. Daniel paused, looking up. "Oh, who?" She shook her head slightly, her lips pressing together in thought. "I don't know. It's just a feeling." He handed her the portrait, and she gasped. Not in the way people usually did when they saw their likeness on paper, but as if she had seen a ghost. Her fingers traced the lines of the drawing, her breath catching in her throat. This looks just like..." She stopped, her eyes darting to Daniel's. "What's your name?" "Daniel," he answered, feeling a strange tightness in his chest. She swallowed hard. "And your last name?" He hesitated. I don't really have one. I grew up in foster care, never knew my real family." The woman's hands trembled. Her eyes filled with something between shock and sorrow. "There's something I need to tell you," she whispered. Daniel's heart pounded. The sounds of the city faded into the background. Everything around him seemed to blur, leaving only the woman's intense gaze locked onto his. And then she said something that would change his life forever. Daniel's world seemed to freeze in place. The woman's eyes held something he couldn't quite understand. An intensity, a sadness, maybe even recognition. His mind raced, searching for an explanation. But before he could ask, she reached into her purse with trembling hands. She pulled out a small faded photograph. The edges were worn, and the colors had dulled with time. But as Daniel's gaze landed on the image, a strange feeling gripped his chest. It was a picture of a little boy, no older than 4 or 5, standing beside a young couple. The man had Daniel's sharp jawline. The woman's eyes held the same warmth as the woman in front of him. And the boy, he had a familiar expression, one Daniel had seen in the mirror his whole life. "This was my nephew," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "He disappeared when he was 5 years old." Daniel's throat went dry. His heart pounded against his ribs. "What are you saying?" She swallowed hard, her voice shaking. I think that little boy might be you." A wave of dizziness washed over him. That didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. He had no memories before the foster system, no real past, just vague dreams, blurry images of people he could never place. I don't remember," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman, whose name he soon learned was Evelyn, looked at him with tears brimming in her eyes. "We searched for years. My brother and his wife, your parents, they never stopped looking. And then one day, they were gone too." Daniel's chest tightened. "Gone? A car accident," she murmured. "They died thinking they lost you forever." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His parents were gone. He had spent his entire life believing he had no one. And now, just as he discovered the truth, it was too late. Evelyn reached for his hand. "But you're not alone. I'm here. You still have family." The weight of it all was too much. Daniel pulled back, shaking his head. "I don't even know if this is real. I don't remember any of it." She nodded, understanding. "I know this is a lot, but would you let me help you remember?" Part of him wanted to walk away, to bury himself in his routine, sketching strangers, hiding in the comfort of anonymity. But another part of him, a deeper part, needed to know the truth. So, for the first time in years, he let someone in. The next few weeks were a blur of old photographs, distant relatives, and stories about a life he couldn't recall. Evelyn told him everything. How his family had moved to the city for a fresh start. How he had loved to draw, even as a child. How one day, during a trip to the park, he vanished without a trace. The details sent a shiver down his spine. A missing child, a life stolen. How had he ended up in the foster system, with no memory of where he came from? The more he learned, the more restless he became. Nights were filled with fragmented dreams, voices calling his name, flashes of a familiar house, a woman's gentle laughter. He woke up gasping for air, his mind trying to piece together the past that had been locked away for so long. Then one evening, as he sat in his small apartment, staring at the portrait he had drawn of Evelyn, something shifted. He picked up a pencil and without thinking, started sketching. His hand moved on its own, as if guided by something beyond memory. When he was done, he stared at the drawing in shock. It was a house he had never seen before. Yet every detail felt hauntingly familiar. A white fence, a large oak tree. In the front yard, a swing hanging from its branches. His heart pounded. Was this real? Or was his mind playing tricks on him? The next day, he showed the sketch to Evelyn. The moment she saw it, she gasped. "This was your childhood home," she whispered. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. The house existed. It wasn't just something from his imagination. "We have to go there," he said, his voice firm. Evelyn hesitated. "It was sold years ago. I don't know who lives there now." But Daniel wasn't backing down. He had spent his life searching for meaning, for connection. And now, he was closer than ever to finding the missing pieces. So, they went. The journey to the house was silent, tense. Daniel's hands clenched into fists as they pulled up to the familiar sight, the same fence, the same tree, the swing still swaying gently in the breeze. His stomach twisted with an emotion he couldn't name. As he stepped onto the porch, his heart pounded so loudly, he could hear it in his ears. He hesitated, then knocked on the door. A few moments passed before the door creaked open, revealing an older man with tired eyes. He studied Daniel for a long moment, then glanced at Evelyn. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice cautious. Daniel swallowed hard. I used to live here." The man's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said something that sent chills down Daniel's spine. "I've been waiting for you." Daniel felt his breath catch in his throat. The old man's words sent a chill down his spine. He had been waiting for him? How could that be? He had never met this man before. At least, not that he could remember. His mind raced with possibilities. But before he could speak, the man stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. Evelyn hesitated, glancing at Daniel for reassurance. But he was already moving. He had spent too long searching for answers to walk away now. As they stepped inside, the house felt eerily familiar. The wooden floors creaked under his feet. The scent of aged books and faint traces of something sweet lingered in the air. His gaze darted around, landing on the framed photos lining the walls. His pulse quickened. Among the pictures of people he didn't recognize, one image stood out. It was a photograph of a young boy with messy dark hair and bright eyes, grinning at the camera. He couldn't look away. He knew that face. It was him. "You do remember, don't you?" the man asked softly. Daniel turned, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" The man let out a heavy breath, as if carrying a weight for years. "My name is Thomas. I was your parents' neighbor. I was there the day you disappeared." Daniel's head spun. "You knew my parents?" Thomas nodded. "And I know what happened to you." The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Evelyn reached for Daniel's hand, grounding him as Thomas continued. "It was a normal afternoon. You were playing outside, like you always did. But then, a car pulled up. A woman got out. She called your name and you ran to her. I assumed she was family. Your aunt, maybe. But when your mother came out moments later, you were gone." Daniel's body tensed. Who was she? Thomas shook his head. No one knew. The police searched for years. There were no witnesses, no clues, nothing. And then, one day, you showed up in the foster system with no memory of your past. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. A stranger had taken him. Why? And why couldn't he remember any of it? "I don't understand," he murmured. "Who would take me? And why would they let me go?" Thomas sighed. "That's the part we never figured out. But you're here now. That means something." Daniel's head throbbed with the weight of it all. His life had been a mystery for so long, and now the truth was finally surfacing. He should have felt relief, but instead, there was only a deep ache, a longing for something he could never get back. His parents, the years lost, the childhood that had been stolen from him. Evelyn squeezed his hand. "You're not alone, Daniel." He swallowed the lump in his throat. For the first time in his life, those words felt real. He had spent so long convincing himself he didn't need anyone. That family was just an idea, not something meant for him. But now, standing in the house where he had once belonged, he knew the truth. Family wasn't just about the past. It was about the people who stayed, who searched, who never gave up. A strange sense of peace washed over him. The pain wouldn't disappear overnight, and there were still so many unanswered questions. But for the first time, he wasn't lost. He wasn't alone. As they stepped outside, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the house. Daniel took one last look at the place where his story had begun, then turned to Evelyn. "Let's go home." And for the first time, he knew exactly where that was.